logged on. Unemployment in Connecticut. And then in that will be July 1st, August 5th, we're going to talk about developing a plan for your housing needs. August 12th, a week later, we're continuing our conversation on housing in talking about your rights in housing. And then in September, we're going to do some policy responses to all of the issues we've identified in building a great life over the course of this series. So September will be a discussion of where we go from here in policy changes and program development. That's where we are. We're very excited to get started with this evening's presentation. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Gretchen. Except now we don't have your sound again. Can you unmute? You can't unmute. Oh, this is a nightmare. Okay. Well, Gretchen was going to do an introduction to Cheryl Bates-Harris, except I don't have any of Cheryl's information in front of me. So, what I'm going to have to do is ask Cheryl to tell us a little bit about herself as she begins. Some of you have heard from Cheryl in the past. She is a nationally recognized expert on employment and benefits and many of the issues that we encounter in employment. And I'm really excited that she has once again agreed to share her expertise with us in our state. So with that, Cheryl.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Really, all anybody needs to know is my name is Cheryl Bates-Harris, and I work for the National Disability Rights Network, which is the membership organization for the protection and advocacy agencies in the 57 states and territories. So I think I've been to Connecticut more than any other state, and I love Connecticut. And I talk about employment all the time. So for those of you who have heard me before, I apologize. You're going to have to listen to me again. But thank you very much for inviting me. So
can you hear me now?
Yes, and so okay. Following Cheryl, we will have another speaker, Michelle Duprey, who will be on later, who will also talk about some of her experiences, and then we'll open it to Q&A. Thank you.
But I just want to tell you that Cheryl greatly underestimates herself. She's a wealth of knowledge about employment, national policy. She's done the work herself. She just, and her very fervent belief that everybody can work is really something that you will see in the presentation. So it's been really great to know Cheryl for all these years, and I hope it continues for quite a while. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to start sharing my screen and see if I can do this right. After 2 weeks, that's not it.
No, that's definitely not it.
Hang on.
I think it's your email.
All right, let me get back to
stop share and then do it again.
But that's what I can't. Oh, stop share. There we go.
Stop share. There you go.
Okay. So screen share. Is that better?
Yes, that's the one.
All right. Whoops. Slideshow from the beginning. Okay.
Yay.
All right. So if you have heard me before, you may hear me repeat some of the things I've said before, because there are certain things that I don't think can be said enough times. Somebody told me once that somebody has to hear something 7 times before they believe it, or they remember it. So I repeat myself a lot. Okay. So, and I changed these a little bit from what I did on Tuesday today's Thursday, Tuesday and Thursday, because there's a lot of truths that we know about employment of people with disabilities. And we know that people with disabilities want to go to work. Back in about 2005, I think, I can't remember the exact time, there was a huge conference that they held in Washington, D.C. called the Alliance for Full Participation. And they brought 1,500 self-advocates in from across the country. And that was before, you know, America's Got Talent or what was it, American Idol, where you had the little buttons to push, generally. Well, when they brought these 1,500 self-advocates together, they, the policy wonks, who are the people who think they're making all the right policies on behalf of people with disabilities, had pretty much decided that the priorities moving forward were going to be X, Y, and Z. And I won't tell you what those are right now. And so when we brought the self-advocates into a room and we asked them, the number one issue that they said they wanted help with was employment of people with disabilities, because they told us that if we helped people get jobs, they would have money to pay for transportation. If we help people get jobs, they would have opportunities to choose where they wanted to live. And if we helped people get jobs, they would probably have healthcare go along with that, or could buy their own healthcare. So all the policy wonks thought that low-income housing, Medicare and Medicare healthcare services and transportation would be the big issues. And it was really quite a surprise to most people that what they said is, we want to go to work, okay? And their desire to go to work is consistent with the policy goals of public policy, which are, when you look at both the ADA and the Rehabilitation Act, it's the opportunity for equal opportunity for full inclusion, independent living, economic self-sufficiency for people. And economic self-sufficiency does not mean living on SSI or SSDI benefits, okay? And because SSI and SSDI benefits for people with disabilities will keep them in poverty. So we all know that meaningful employment is essential to establishing dignity and well-being and allowing people the same opportunities afforded other members of society. We all take having money for granted, and most of us live in the upper limits of what our income will allow. When we have money, we spend it. At least my mother did. My mother's example was that she felt she had failed as a consumer if she had money in the bank at the end of the month. Now, I don't recommend that for anyone, but people can do things, they can buy things, they can go places when you have money. And the only way that you're ever going to get money is through employment, okay? Gretchen talked about the fact that I believe in the employability of everyone, and it's our job to presume competence and to presume employability of people, because that's what the Rehabilitation Act tells us. The Rehab Act specifies that all individuals, regardless of the significance of their disability, are capable of engaging in an employment outcome if they're given the proper services and supports. And the absolute minimum that any person with a disability should be considering is matching their skills and interests with real jobs, okay? Everyone has talent. Everyone can do something. Sometimes it's just a little harder for us to figure out what it is that that person can do or what it is that person wants to do. But we have years of data that show that there are thousands of occupations that people with disabilities in the community can do. And sometimes everybody goes, oh, wow, isn't that special? Or aren't they exceptional? Or aren't they lucky they got this job? No, it's a matter of perseverance, and it's a matter of really matching skills and interests together. So people with most significant disabilities can work if they're given proper services and supports. And I can honestly tell you, I first started doing this kind of work back in 1986. And I have worked with a number of people with disabilities. I did job placement for 4 years myself. And people would always kind of say, oh, I don't think they'll be able to do that. And I can tell you that based on my year's experience, the biggest barrier to employment of people with disabilities is lack of expectation. When we set the bar low, we are not disappointed. And so I continue to hear parents and teachers say, oh, my son will never work. When ABLE passed, the ABLE, gosh, I'm drawing a blank, or a better life experience. When
Even a
that
better life experience.
Thank you. You know, I'm like drawing a blank. I've been talking too much today. So when Abel passed, I heard, you know, a lot of people say, well, now we don't have to worry because about, you know, so-and-so ever going to work, because now we can take care of him in different ways. And my response to that is always, Abel should be used to help achieve that better life experience and put your money into that. But it should certainly not be used as an excuse to protect people from working or to change the expectation, because all of us, when adults, we go to work. We grow up, we graduate from high school, you either get a job or you go on to post-secondary education. But certainly for people without disabilities, we don't tell our sons and daughters that you can live at home and we'll feed you and we'll water you and we'll clothe you for the rest of your life. That's just not the expectation we set for children without disabilities, and it's not the expectation we should set for people with disabilities. So I was specifically asked to talk about vocational rehabilitation, and I am quite familiar with VRS in Connecticut, and I'm actually quite familiar with VRS in probably 50 of the 57 states and territories, because this is what we do. This is what I do. We train advocates on the foundations and the principles of the Rehabilitation Act. And so we know what the law says. We know what the law says they can do. We also know all the excuses that VRS comes up with. But the core principle, the core basis on which the Rehabilitation Act and the VR program was founded is on the idea that people are capable of high quality, competitive, integrated employment when provided with the necessary services and supports. So 1973 was kind of the turning point for the Rehabilitation Act. We all refer to it now as the Rehab Act of 1973 as amended, even though it's been amended 4 or 5 or I think 5 times since then. And when I say amended, the Rehabilitation Act is basically a spending clause. So Congress authorizes states to receive money from the federal government to operate a rehabilitation program consistent with the law. And in 1973, prior to 1973, I guess I should say, that prior to 73, the only people who got services from vocational rehabilitation were primarily people with physical disabilities. People for whom you could provide a wheelchair and restore their mobility. You could buy them a prosthetic arm or a leg. People for whom you could buy things so that they could go back to work. People with psychiatric disabilities never saw VR services before. People with intellectual and developmental disabilities didn't get VR services because the assumption was that people would not be able to work. So in 1973, Congress said all people and all disabilities are eligible to receive VR services. But prior to 1992, the reauthorization of of 1992, individuals could be found not eligible for VR services because they were too significantly disabled. In 1972, Congress said, boo on that, and they added what we call the presumption of benefit. So specifically, since 1992, there is a presumption, again, that individuals can benefit from vocational rehabilitation services. And the only way they can be found ineligible for VR services is if the VR agency develops clear and convincing evidence that the individual cannot work. And that clear and convincing evidence is developed through multiple trial work experiences in real job settings of consistent with the individual's choice of vocational goal. So in other words, it's not sending somebody somewhere for an assessment, a vocational rehab assessment, to demonstrate how well they can put nuts and bolts together or how quickly they can take them apart. If somebody is interested in working in an office environment, it's actually developing a trial work experience in an office, in a real business, and having the people there demonstrate that, no, this is just not going to work for this individual. And so it's multiple trial work experiences, not one and done. And only through that clear and convincing evidence can someone be found not eligible for services. Furthermore, it states that if an individual is found not eligible for services, VR is to revisit them a year later to see what other services or supports might have become available to help them achieve competitive employment. Okay. And I would venture to say in all of my years, I have yet to see a VR counselor go back and look at a case that was closed to reassess it and reevaluate it. And because a number of CAP advocates either worked for the VR agency before and came to CAP, or vice versa, we've had CAP advocates leave the P&A agency and go to work for the VR agency. And they have told me time and time again, when that little note pops up in a year that says you're supposed to revisit so-and-so, they hit delete, okay? Because nobody holds them accountable for that. So VR is a process. And when we do training for advocates, and I've actually trained state rehab councils as well as one state VR agency counselors, we talk about its process, process, process. Oftentimes what happens is they put what I call the cart before the horse. So I'm going to talk about the process first because that's important. VR is an eligibility-based program, unlike the educational services, which are an entitlement. You are entitled to a free and appropriate public education, but once you exit the school system, you are in the world of eligibility services. So nobody gets found eligible for services if you don't make an application for services. Now, I think, well, it doesn't matter what I think. As young adults or children are starting to do transition planning, which should occur no later than age 16, I think that it should be an automatic referral to the VR agency requesting an application for services, but that's not what happens, okay? When VR counselors show up at an individualized transition meeting or an individual educational plan meeting, they are there simply in a consultative role. They are there to possibly suggest what some services and options might be to help this young person transition from school to work or school to school. But that's not an application for services. And so again, I think VR counselors should bring applications for services with them to meetings. And I think VR counselors should explain, I am only here in a consultative role, and not talk as though they are the counselor for that individual. Because oftentimes what happens is we have a meeting in, let's say, May, and the VR counselor says, well, you know, I think summer youth employment would be a really good opportunity for Johnny to get some work-based learning experience this summer. So I think that, you know, that would be a good idea. Everybody agrees, yep, that's a great idea. And the VR counselor goes back to their office, and in the middle of July, Johnny's calling and saying, I thought you were going to hook me up with summer youth employment. And then he finds out that, well, no, that was just a suggestion. I'm not your counselor. In fact, you don't have a counselor. So making that application for services is incumbent. And I think the school should give them out. I think VR counselors should bring them. I think they should be available online. But I oftentimes think that they are the best kept secret. So really, all a parent or a person with a disability needs to do is to send a written request to the VR agency expressing interest in an application for services. That starts the documentation, and that should make the application available. And so in order to be eligible for VR, all someone needs to have is a physical or mental impairment that results in a substantial impediment to employment, okay? It doesn't mean that you have to bring your ticket to work with you. It doesn't mean that you have to have a significant disability. It simply is you have to have a disability. Once the application is received by the VR agency, they should use existing records to determine eligibility to the extent they exist. There is absolutely no reason on earth that they need to reevaluate whether an individual with an intellectual and developmental disability still has an intellectual or developmental disability. School records, medical records, hospital records, whatever should be used to make the eligibility determination. And there is a special rule for SSI kids, individuals under the age of 18 or even over 18, if they are receiving supplemental security income and or if they're receiving Social Security disability insurance, then there is a presumption that they have a physical or mental impairment that results in an impediment to employment. And there is also an assumption that when they sign that application for services, they are agreeing that their intent is to go to work. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay, I'm going to keep going. So then once an eligibility determination has been made, and oftentimes, like I say, it can be based simply on the existing medical records, but a lot of times people don't know what their opportunities are or what it is they want to be when they grow up. I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to be when I grow up. So in situations like that, once the eligibility determination is made, then VR can do an assessment to determine strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, abilities, capabilities, okay? And they do that to be helpful, not as a, we're going to rule you out of VR services. This should be done to help identify what are the interests and capabilities of the individual and where do they want to go when they grow up, okay? So the client, the next step would be to identify a vocational goal. What is the job that the individual wants to do? And that goal should be based exclusively on client choice. The client has the opportunity and is expected to identify the job goal of their choice. And I would venture to say, based on our review of the CAP reports that get written every year, about 1/3 of the issues with vocational rehabilitation comes down to the counselor disagreeing with the client's goal. Because unless there is agreement on what the client's goal is going to be, it will hinder the rest of the process, including development of the IPE. But the client is always to be afforded their choice of client goal. Choice is a huge buzzword that keeps occurring throughout the Rehab Act. So once we've agreed on the goal, we develop what's called an individualized plan for employment. Okay, notice it's called a plan for employment. So when people develop the IPE, their goal is to go to work. And I have to constantly remind counselors that the I stands for individualized. Okay, so the IPE is a written document that outlines the client's goal and then what is going to happen to make that goal become a reality. So it starts with the employment goal. And the employment goal could be an office clerk. The employment goal could be a dishwasher, if that's what the individual wants. The client goal could be a helicopter pilot, okay? Once you've identified the employment goal, then it's incumbent to identify and delineate what services does this individual need in order to reach that goal. So if somebody wanted to, let's say the person wanted to be an accounting clerk, okay, they would, need to identify what does the person need? Does the person have any office type skills in order to do that job, or are there any specific office skills that the person might need? Are they going to need to learn how to operate a computer? Is there any software that they're going to have to need? Are they going to, what does the individual need to reach that goal? And not all of those services necessarily need to be paid for by vocational rehabilitation, although the bulk of them should. But let's say, for instance, an individual has anger issues. We see that a lot. I call anger issues frustration for a lot of people. So if somebody needs to perhaps maintain some counseling to address some of the anger issues that they might have, that could be part of their IPE, even though it would be paid for by a different agency. And then you clearly delineate what agency is doing what and who do they pay for. And then once everybody's agreed that this goal is written, these are the services that are needed to move towards that goal, then the IPE must be signed by both the VR client and the VR counselor. Both of them have to agree to and sign the IPE. Now, sometimes people will say, there are additional services I need. Should I not sign the IPE until I get those services in place? And I will usually say, sign the IPE, but then immediately request that the IPE be amended to include these additional items. And if you're going to have to fight for them, then you've still got the basic structure of your IPE in place so that services can start and move forward without further delaying things. So what services can VR pay for? There's this little catch-all phrase, which I use all the time in 361.45 of the Code of Federal Regulations, that basically says any service necessary to assist in preparing for, securing, retaining, or regaining an employment outcome that is consistent with the strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, abilities, capabilities, interests, and informed choice of the individual. I don't know how the rest of you interpret that, but for me, that's a pretty broad statement, okay? It's really anything that the individual needs to obtain, secure, or regain employment, all right? And we'll leave it there for a minute because I'm going to talk more about it. So what are some specific services? I'm going to go through these really quickly because you can all read, and if you want this PowerPoint, I'm sure they'll give it to you. Assessments to determine eligibility. Clearly, guidance, counseling, and job placement services. Not everybody knows what they want to be when they grow up. At 17 or 18, I think I probably changed my mind 6 times. So helping, the primary goal of the VR counselor is to provide guidance and counseling and put people on that employment path. If someone needs training, whether it's training at a vocational school, whether it's on the job training as an apprentice, whether it's going to college, they can pay the costs of those trainings, as well as to purchase any tools, materials, and or books that the individual needs to participate in their rehabilitation plan. There's something called maintenance for costs incurred during rehabilitation. Now, maintenance has been defined in the Rehab Act as the cost of things that is over and above usual living expenses. So if a person is participating in a training program and they're having to drive 30 miles each way to participate in training, then the cost of gasoline to get there or the cost of transportation can be a maintenance cost because they're expending, it's costing them things that they wouldn't usually cost them in their everyday life. So it could be room and board at a college, it could be all kinds of different things. I'm not sure I put it in here, so I'm going to mention it here. It can also include things like daycare. If a parent has young children that they would normally be staying at home and taking care of, and now they're participating in a rehab plan, VR can pay for the cost of the child care. And that's under a category of services that we call expenses to family members. But so child care is the most common example of that. They can pay for diagnosis and treatment of mental impairments, anything that will help stabilize those conditions. So physical therapy, mental health counseling, chiropractic care. For some people, it might be acupuncture or, eye surgery, eyeglasses, things like that. So again, anything that can be done to help minimize the disability and stop it from deteriorating could be paid for by vocational rehabilitation. Now, there's something in the Rehab Act called comparable benefits. So if the person has health insurance, that would be health insurance, I do this all the time, I'm sorry. Health insurance would be a comparable benefit, but they can pay for other expenses. Talked about transportation in terms of transportation getting to and from training, but also as part of transportation, VR can pay for vehicle modifications as well as the purchase of vehicles. Now, they have to maintain written policies around there, and I will guarantee you that there are very, very few states that outright purchase a vehicle. But sometimes they will pay for the down payment for someone to purchase a vehicle. Sometimes they'll pay, different things. California is the only state I know that purchases vehicles. They will only purchase the vehicles after the individuals have a job in hand, and then they will do the modifications. And usually the process is so long and so protracted that by the time the vehicle becomes available and modified, the person has either lost their job or their disability is deteriorated. But again, that's another story for another day. VR can pay for personal assistance services while receiving VR services. We know that a lot of people need personal assistance services that are provided in the home, but Medicaid does not pay for those services outside of the home. So what if someone needs a personal assistant while they're at college for either toileting or feeding or something like that? VR can pay for those services while they're participating in a VR plan. This next bullet point is really about assistive technology. Well, not assistive technology, interpreter services. If someone needs interpreter services or readers because they're blind, or they need rehab teaching and orientation and mobility services, those are clearly identified as services VR can pay for. So kind of along with that, transportation training. If somebody can go to work and there is public transportation, but they don't know how to use it, VR can pay for the travel training to help them to do that. Okay, still more, and I think this is my last slide on these bullet points. If you need an occupational license in order to go to work, or tools, equipment, or initial stocks and supplies, if you're self-employed, VR can pay for those. Attorneys can't practice law until they've taken the bar exam. So they have to take the bar exam in order to get their license. Those can all be paid for. Technical assistance for self-employment. People with disabilities often do well at self-employment, and sometimes self-employment is the better option for them because they can then manage their disability, manage their energy, and manage their business when they're able to. That doesn't necessarily need to be a full-time job. So VR should be providing assistance around self-employment, including helping point people and obtain services so people can write their business plan. So VR agency is not going to fund self-employment without a business plan, without some market analysis and some research, and VR can pay for those support services so that that can happen. Most VR counselors don't have a clue as to how to provide those things themselves. Rehabilitation technology, okay? Rehabilitation technology means not only the assistive technology devices that an individual might need, but it's the assessment for technology. Is there technology out there that can help this person? Whether it be a communication device, whether it be an optical scanner, whether it's some kind of enlarging, whatever. So it's not only the device, but it's also teaching people so they know how to use that device, okay? And anything related to technology is exempt from looking for anybody else to pay for it, okay? So VR can't say, yes, you could definitely benefit from this, but go find somebody else to figure out to pay for it. It is exempt, and the VR agency has a responsibility to do assessments for technology at 4 different points in the VR process. Okay, transition services for students with disability. It's there. The IDEA has identical requirements since 1990 that basically say transitioning students will be referred to vocational rehabilitation for services and for assistance with transition. And VR is required to have a plan in place before the individual exits high school. And I can tell you that that rarely happens. Too often individuals transition, there is not a plan in place, so they go home and they sit on the couch and they play video games. So transition services with students with disabilities is not anything new, but there are some enhanced requirements now. For instance, any individual with a disability is to receive pre-employment transition services before the student exits schools. And from there, they can choose to apply for vocational rehabilitation services. But most of the time, we have discovered that transition students go from school to sheltered workshops. They do not pass vocational rehabilitation, and they do not get $200 worth of services. So transition. Supported employment and customized employment. Supported employment and customized employment, I'm going to talk a whole lot more about in a few minutes. But these are methods of delivering services to people with the most significant disabilities. And supported employment, well, let me back up for a minute. Traditionally, the way vocational rehabilitation has operated is you identify your vocational objective. VR will provide you the training necessary to do that type of work. And then with a little bit of luck, you will find your own job, and then you'll go to work, and VR will close your case and say, look, we did a good job rehabilitating someone. Well, that doesn't work well for individuals with the most significant disabilities, and it certainly doesn't work well with individuals with IDD. So, and the first approach that I mentioned is what we used to call the train and place. We're going to train you to do something. Skills will transfer from your training to the job you do, and everybody works happily ever after. So supported employment came around in 1984, and it was largely a result of Madeline Will, who was RSA commissioner at the time, because she had a son with Down syndrome, and she knew that the traditional VR approaches were not going to work well with her son. So what supported employment does is it flips the model backwards. It says we are going to identify an appropriate job opening. We are going to place the individual into the job, and then we are going to provide the supports they need to learn the job, retain the job, and keep the job. Customized employment was a new buzzword that was added to the 2015 Workforce Innovations and Opportunity Act. People like me get really upset when people say customized employment is new, because it's not. I did customized employment back in 1986 when I was doing job placement, and I just called it a good job match. But anyway, I'm going to talk about the similarities and the differences between the two in more detail. Oh, and here's the bullet point where I said service to family members to assist a person with a disability achieve an employment outcome. So again, child care, elder care, things like that are the most common. If somebody has been staying at home and is a primary caregiver for another person, and now they're trying to go to work, that caregiving still has to continue. So the costs of those services to enable a person to participate can be paid for with VR dollars. All right, any questions so far? I'm going to stop. This is a good point to stop and see if anybody has any burning questions. There's a lot in the chat box. Is anybody watching the chat box to see if I need to?
I think Gretchen's been really monitoring that, but
Okay.
you know, if If there are other burning questions, let's hold till the end and then come back to them.
Okay.
There's
Sounds
one
good to
thing
me.
I really would like you to address at the end before we get burning questions, which is this whole idea that you go into school and all you get is level up and that they won't allow you to apply for services through VR. I know every time I bring this up, but it is a big problem here.
That is a huge problem, and Level Up is what Connecticut calls their pre-employment transition services. And there is absolutely nothing in the Rehabilitation Act that says you cannot apply for VR services prior to receiving Level Up services. In fact, that would be a direct violation of law, because individuals can apply for VR services, quite frankly, as early as age 14. And at age 14, an individual is not ready for may not be ready for the Level Up services. So that's a problem in Connecticut. And I think we need to have a long discussion and do some strategy planning. And quite frankly, between you, me, and the woodwork, that might be a good opportunity to file an injunction against the state for requiring Level Up services prior to application. And so we'll talk about that later, because I have been thinking about that. Okay, Gretchen?
Thank you. My heart feels better.
Okay, good. All right. So again, we've already covered this slide. Let me move on to the next one as soon as my computer wants to work with me again. All right. Now, vocational rehabilitation is required to be able to provide all services to all eligible applicants and clients of the state. And if they are not, that if they do not have enough money for the full range of VR services to all eligible individuals, the state has to establish a priority of order, okay? And the Rehab Act, ever since 1973, has expressly said that that individuals with the most significant disability should be served first. And I know that individuals with the most significant disabilities have not been served by VRS in Connecticut, by DARS in Virginia, or any other state that I would look at, because individuals with the most significant disability are those individuals who have gone directly to the sheltered workshop without passing VR, without getting $200 worth of services. And I furthermore believe that any state not on an order of selection is failing to meet the intent of the law as well as the letter of the law, because not every individual with the disability requires VR services, all right? And I'm a classic example of that. Those of you who know me know that at the end of the day, I kind of shuffle my feet and can barely walk. I would qualify as a person with a disability. But if my boss was to fire me tomorrow, I don't need VR in order to get another job. I need another job. So my needs could easily be met by the generic workforce system in the American job centers. Those are people, those individuals who just need a job should not be going to vocational rehabilitation in order to allow people with more significant disabilities to get those services. So if the state doesn't have money, they're required to go on an order of selection. The state defines how they're defining most significantly disabled. And this, again, is an area of much discussion. We have 42 VR agencies that currently say they are on an order of selection. And yet, when you read their order of selection, they are still continuing to provide services to all applicants and clients, which means they're not on an order of selection. So how is most significantly disabled defined? Differently in different states. In Pennsylvania, because I happen to live here and I was the CAP person in Pennsylvania, their definition of an individual with the most significant disability is 4 or more functional limitations as a result of the disability or impairment. 4 or more functional limitations. I have seen order of selection policies that say if you have 2 or more functional impairments, you are significantly disabled. or most significantly disabled. The Rehab Act defines significant disability. There's a laundry list of disabilities in there, such as amputation, seizure disorder, psychiatric disability. I forget what some of the others are. And if you have those diagnoses, cerebral palsy, you are automatically considered significantly disabled, but most significantly disabled is left up to the state. But it does have to follow certain guidelines. The state cannot say individuals with the most significant disabilities are those who are going to cost us the most money. Okay, it can't be based on diagnosis. It can't be based on the cost of their services. It can't be based on any other protected class, such as race, ethnicity, gender, whatever. So it's more what you can't do with defining most significantly disabled than what you can do. And in Cheryl's thwarted opinion, because she always has one, in certain states, you could be a Mack truck with a flat tire and meet the definition of most significantly disabled. If you're interested in what Cheryl believes is a well-written policy regarding most significantly disabled, look to Massachusetts. I love the Massachusetts definition of most significantly disabled. Okay, so supported employment. Supported employment is for individuals who have been determined eligible for vocational rehabilitation and determined to be an individual with the most significant disability. So everyone, again, with an intellectual or developmental disability is not necessarily fall in the most significant category depending on their functional abilities. Because we all know, and we hear, high functioning autism, high functioning, whatever. The reason that I point out the fact that supported employment, you have to be eligible and you have to be most significantly disabled, it's so that those additional rehab dollars can be spent. And so supported employment is a very specific service based for individuals, based on the assessment that the individual will need this intensive level of support in order to maintain employment. One of my pet peeves is that oftentimes when I've talked with states that are transitioning away from the congregate facility to the community placement in terms of jobs, is they make an assumption that every individual who has previously worked in a sheltered workshop will require supported employment. And I think that's a false assumption for two reasons. Number one, people who were in a sheltered workshop never got to choose the type of work they were doing. They weren't given other opportunities to do other things to show what they would excel at, and nobody ever asked them what they wanted to do. So I think that individuals need to be given the opportunity to go through the regular process. The other reason I think that when we automatically assume that people need supported employment, we are again buying into that assumption that people with disabilities are less capable of making choices and decisions and working. It's kind of like shooting yourself in the foot. So again, that's my pet whatever. But supported employment requires that they be found most significantly disabled. And I think is the next one. This is how it works. You get intensive on-the-job skill training to achieve and maintain job stability. The on-site, the training is provided on the job site doing the actual work that the person is going to be doing. It includes regular follow-up services and regular contact with the individual and or the employer to make sure that the individual is really learning their job and that they're stabilized in their job. There is always a learning curve when people go into a new job. So you want to make sure that even though the person may have demonstrated to you the week that you were there, that they could do that job, that maybe the next week when they bring in something else or they add another step, that individual is still able to maintain and do the job. And then it should include discrete post-employment services following the transition. And when I'm talking discrete post-employment post-employment services, I'm not talking about a job coach hovering over someone in a work environment making sure that they are doing their job. I mean, that is extremely stigmatizing to an individual, and it really will hurt more than it will help, because you know what happens? People are going to go in the lunchroom and they're going to go, you know, who is that person and why are they watching them? And why does he need that level of support? So again, my pet peeve, but that's the way supported employment should be. Sometimes the job coach's job is not to do the job for the individual. And people should not be going into businesses and saying, we've got an individual who'd like to work here. We're not sure if he could do this job because I know you've said it's a fast-paced environment, but we'll give it a try. And if he can't do it, the job coach will do it. So don't you worry, hire this person with a disability. Instead, what should be happening is the job coach should be supporting. And I have known job coaches who, after the first week on the job site, have never set foot on the job site again, but they're still working with that person to get him up every morning, to get him to the bus on time, because he keeps missing the bus and he keeps getting to work late, things like that. So job coaching goes beyond just the work skills and into what are the other skills he needs to go with it. So supported employment's been around for 30 years now at this point, and there's been a movement towards kind of an evidence-based practice of customized employment. And customized employment, like I said, is what Cheryl believes to be nothing more than a really good job match, but with some definite steps in it. A lot of times, job developers go to employers with I've got a person with a disability who'd like to work here. Would you be willing to hire them? And then they go on to perhaps we can bring a job coach. As people with a disability have a right to have their disability protected, in so much as they don't necessarily want everyone to know what their disability is. And nobody's going to get a job based on their deficits and the things they can't do. We get jobs based on our interests and our ability and our passion and things we really like. So customized employment kind of took supported employment and again spun it around a little bit. So customized employment is a flexible process that looks at what does this individual have that they can offer to a job, and what is it they really want to do, and then what type of employment environment would a person like this find a job, and then you very carefully match the needs of the job seeker with the needs of an employer, so that legitimate work is getting done. And I call it my A list, my B list, and my C list. My A list when I go to work are the things that I absolutely have to do in order to get paid. My B list are the things that I get time to work on occasionally, but not always. And my C list is, if I had all the time and money in the world, these are the things that I would do, but they're not getting done. So with customized employment, the way you would approach an employer is by saying, what's not getting done around here that would really help contribute to your bottom line if you had somebody who could do that. Okay, so you find out from an employer, what is it that they really need done that's not getting done? And that's not the first step in the process. That's really the last step. But once you've identified an employer needs and you have an individual who could match those needs, that's the customized employment setup. All right. So it's an outcome that results from an individualized, person-centered process. Now, I just described the process with the employer. The first thing that has to happen is you've got to find out what the person with the disability wants to do. Okay. So it's not the traditional approach to even supported employment, because I know a lot of times job developers read the classified ads, if they still exist, or look through, who's hiring right now. So this is not about a competitive hiring process. This is not about responding to an opening that this is developing a relationship. So it optimizes that coordination between the job personnel and the supported employer job the job seeker. So it's, again, very, very individualized. So it's a new definition in the law. I think I've already made these points, so I'm going to move on. It's successful if the job seeker is treated as an individual who's free to make choices. If someone comes in and says, I want to work at a funeral home, okay? If that's their choice, that choice needs to be respected. And then we need to figure out, it's our job to figure out, what is it about that environment that that person likes? What is it that they think they're going to do? And take it from there. So it's the individual's opportunity to make a choice. It's assumed we have to assume that everybody has competencies, and we need to figure out what those are. We need to be able to do an assessment and really get to know this individual, but not through the traditional assessment process. So it's like talking to the family members. What is it that makes this person light up? What is it that they really like to do on their time off? Talking to the group home staff, what do they like to do? What do they not like to do? So it's really pulling together that whole discovery process.
Hey, Cheryl, about 5 minutes.
I saw that. Thank you. Okay, so customized employment is a service that can be requested from VR, just like supported employment can be a service. But I caution you, customized employment is not a job goal. Supported employment is not a job goal. You still need to design or determine and identify the job classes of people. So overall, customized employment, you do discovery. Once you know what the individual can do, here we go. You do the discovery, you identify what are the strengths of the individual. Then once you know the strengths of the individual, then you have to use your thinking caps and think, what kinds of jobs could this kind of work be done in? And you have to be very specific there's no point in approaching Amazon for a job in automotives or something like that. You need to very carefully negotiate or think through what kinds of businesses would have these positions. And then you negotiate and you do job development directly with the employer. And if the employer comes back and says, no, I know you've said that he can do X and Y, but I need someone who can do X, Y, Z and A, B, and C, then that's not going to be a good job match. It ends there. You keep looking. Once you've got that perfect job match, then the individual goes to work and the post-employment support is provided to make sure that the relationship is working for both the individual and the employer. So discovery can include anybody, and discovery is about finding out things about the individual. And so family members, all the people that we would typically ignore need to be included in this process. Their friends, what do they like to do? Where do they like to go? The job search, I kind of said this, you determine a list of potential employers and a task list. You do an analysis to see whether or not it works. The job is developed and negotiated, including how are supports going to be provided? Does the employer want an individual there like a job coach, or do they just want to rely on the natural supports in the company and a coworker providing them the training? And then you figure out exactly what is going to happen so that the specific contributions will meet both the needs of the employer and the individual. Post-employment support, probably the most important thing is to check in not only with the individual, but also with the employer to make sure it's working and to help the individual report wages and manage benefits. That's a whole nother story for another day. That's what the work incentive planning and assistance programs are. So I'm almost done, I promise. So employment's about a good job match because employment contributes to economic growth. It's not if someone should work, but where someone should work. Customized employment is a strategy that benefits everyone. And remember, under the ADA, we don't ask employers to hire people that are not qualified to do the work. This is just a different way to determine the qualifications of the worker. and it differs from typical VR personnel and supported employment job developers who typically look to find a job and then build the supports around them. So these are a number of different pathways of how people can get jobs. VR can pay for the supports and services, but all of them don't need to be provided by the VR agency. And all of these programs have to provide services in a non-discriminatory fashion. So you can read this list. Universal principles of reasonable accommodation and non-discrimination apply, and the job of choice is possible through competitive integrated employment, including supported employment and customized employment. So I'm going to talk about for 30 seconds. These are persistent job killers. And when I hear people say these things, they drive me nuts. An individual's not ready for a job. What does that mean? The job is not realistic. We're not there to be the reality police. You'll never do it means that you've set the bar lower again. And so again, people will rise to their highest level of expectation, which means they won't. And if we protect people's benefits, we are dooming them to poverty. So work incentives are called work incentives for a reason. There's lots of people that can give you information about how work affects your benefits so that you can plan. And this is me. I'm done. Gretchen.
Keeps telling me I'm muted.
Well, don't.
Thank you very much. That was great. We could have talked forever and ever and ever and ever. That is for sure.
All right, I'm done.
So
So now thank you for listening to me, as always.
I always learn something new. So that was great. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So our second speaker this evening, I'm also excited to introduce her, is Michelle Duprey. Where are you on my map? Oh, there you are. Michelle gave me her bio, so I'm just going to read it for you, and she can talk all about, she is an individual with a disability who works in Connecticut, and we were chatting back and forth today, and she informed me about this article that she's written called The ADA at 30, My Perspective, which I thought was really good and really interesting to read, and we're going to supply that as part of resources for Bagel.
Gretchen, it's posted on the website, and so you, Linda, if you can post that link in the chat box, that would be great.
Thank you. All right, let me tell you a little bit about Michelle. Attorney Michelle Duprey is currently serving as the Deputy Corporation Counsel for Employment Litigation for the City of New Haven. Prior to assuming this position in January of 2021, Ms. Duprey served as Director of the Department of Services for Persons with Disabilities for the City of New Haven for more than 22 years. Ms. Duprey's responsibilities in her current role include representing the city employment matters at all phases of the complaint process, as well as working on system change within the organizational structure to reduce overall employment claims exposure. Ms. Duprey advises city departments on various employment issues and is actively working to increase training opportunities for managers on handling complex employee issues. Ms. Duprey is a frequent presenter on topics of ADA compliance, diversity, and the disability community. Ms. Duprey has been a longtime member of CBA's Labor and Employment section and a past chair of the Human Rights and Responsibility section. She has also served on many statewide committees, the boards of the Connecticut Women's Education and Legal Fund, the Connecticut ACLU, and the Osteogenesis Imperfecta Foundation. Ms. Duprey has written for the Connecticut Lawyer Magazine, Connecticut Law Tribune, Compensation Quarterly, the Hartford Courant, and written various letters to the editor on disability issues, participated in panel discussions on the ADA, employment issues, community inclusion, emergency preparedness, and barriers for women with disabilities. Ms. Duprey has been a leader in the area of ADA compliance in the state of Connecticut for more than 25 years, both in her official capacity and personally. Her ultimate goal is getting employers to see the broader benefits of employing people with disabilities and chronic health conditions and the contributions of those who can make, those individuals can make to an organization and the bottom line. So you see, she's eminently qualified to talk with all of us today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing her. So thank you, Michelle, for joining us.
Well, thank you, Gretchen. I'm honored to be here. And actually, I wish I got to hear most of Cheryl's presentation, which was wonderful. And I wish I had heard it a lot earlier in my career to help me navigate the system that people with disabilities have to work within in vocational rehabilitation. I actually started in the voc rehab system back when I was 16 in high school, and got various services throughout my career. But initially, you know, when I was 16, we're talking about 1980 something, we'll just say. Their services were somewhat limited. And when I started college, I was studying economics, and they listed my career goal as secretarial. And I kind of lost my mind when I saw that, because I was studying economics, and there was no way my career goal was secretarial. So that was kind of, even earlier, I had several teachers tell me that I couldn't do certain career goals, that my disability, my physical disability, prevented me from doing. For a long time, I wanted to be an architect, and I had teachers tell me, well, you can't do that because you can't go to a construction site. And then to have BRS list my career goal as secretarial, you know, there is always this low expectation. And it really has only been in the past few years that I've seen that kind of problem waning for me personally. But it's only because I've had now a pretty lengthy career. I've been working full time for 28 years now. So I think I'm over the people having low expectations for me problem, but the barriers are still there. So they've changed quite a lot. So I attended college from 1986 to 1990. I got a business degree, studied marketing and economics. My father convinced me to go right into graduate school because he was convinced that my lifelong earnings would be higher if I just got graduate school right out of the way. So that was a personal choice that I made to apply to law school. And when I applied to law school, I only applied to one. This is kind of stupid in hindsight, but my attitude was, if I'm meant to be a lawyer, I'll get in. And which probably wasn't the wisest strategy. But fortunately, my guardian angels made sure I got into law school, and I went to the University of Connecticut School of Law. And my initial goal was to do corporate law and related to international trade, and specifically my senior year in college, I studied the Pacific Rim and took Chinese. And so my thought was that I would do corporate work related to trade in the Pacific. And I always had these career goals that exceeded what everybody expected from me. My parents, on the other hand, never indicated to me that they did not expect me to go to college or that they did not expect me to work full time. That was always, always, always the expectation my parents made me believe. And so I felt I had no choice but to have those goals, which when Gretchen and I were talking earlier, really was amazing, because if you think about the 80s and that was before the ADA was passed, that was really an amazing perspective for them to have. I've only in the past few years recently learned that my mother was not sure I could go to college or work full time, but she never let on to me that that was a question in her mind. So I always assumed I could do it. And BRS was helpful in some ways and very unhelpful in others. By the time I got to law school, they had changed my career goal from secretarial to legal, which was nice. But I also was told by my BRS counselor that I was too educated for her to help me. So that was a little disappointing. But I will say BRS has been phenomenal in providing the equipment. I have modified vehicles throughout my career. I've had several of those. I've had some home modifications. I lived up in the Hartford area. I moved down to the New Haven area for my job. And when I moved here, it was really hard to find accessible housing. So I bought something that was almost accessible, and BRS helped me put a ramp on the front, things like that. And that was significantly valuable to me and being able to do what I do. So I know I took a little bit of a jab at BRS, but they have been critical in my career path. But they also don't give you anything. You have to ask. You have to learn what you're entitled to and push them for it. Because even the vehicle modification documents that my van now is 7 years old. When I signed those last sets of documents, BRS makes a significant effort to discourage you from getting a modified van. You have to be prepared to face those doubts about your capabilities and whether you can manage it and whether you'll be able to use that adaptation successfully. So I guess my theme is that there's lots of barriers in your career and getting there. But if you have your goal and you push people to expand, whether it's your BRS counselor or your school system or employers in general, to change the way they think about your career objectives, then hopefully you can get to where you want to be. Now, I said when I entered law school, I thought I was going to be a corporate lawyer. My second year of law school, I took employment discrimination law. And I was like, well, wait a minute. I think this is cool. And I also took at the same time corporate law, which I really did not like. So those two combinations got me to change. And when I got out of law school, I worked at a small law firm that was not a good fit for me. And I had a lot of trouble finding a law firm that would hire me. And it forced me to start my own practice. And it wasn't by any means a career goal, but I wanted to keep working. And it was a way I was able to do that. I had made the networks of other people in the legal profession, and people were sending me clients. So I was able to sustain that while I started, and obviously I got better at it as it was going, and I got more clients. So I was able to make it work. It wasn't something I would have chosen for myself, but I was doing the work I liked. So it worked out for me. And then in 1998, a friend of mine told me about this job in New Haven. And I thought, well, it's not something I had previously considered. I had always been looking for jobs in law firms. But I thought, well, this might be a really interesting way to use my legal background to help people with disabilities and to keep the city of New Haven out of court. And so I made the transition to working at the city. And as Gretchen said, I've been at the city now just a few weeks shy of 23 years. And in that role, I was able to, I think there were a lot of doubters when I first started at the city, just like all the other times in my life where people doubted my skills, but I felt confident in my skills. And so I was able to win people over and make people understand what they needed to be doing and took me seriously. And I think that ultimately culminates in me changing jobs in January, where I'm no longer doing disability work. I'm doing pure legal work now. And part of the reason that I'm able to do that is, one, all that groundwork I did for people taking me seriously despite my disability. And I did competent work as best I could. And I think it really demonstrates the efforts a lot of us have been making in getting diversity and inclusion to encompass people with disabilities. So I can't think of a better way, a better success of the ADA than somebody with a disability being given a fairly high level job in an organization that isn't just about disability. Because I was absolutely happy doing the job I was doing. Don't get me wrong, but this is a broken barrier that I'm quite proud of. Even if I'm only in the job a few years, because, I'm getting older and I'd like to retire someday. But even if I'm only in the job a few years, I feel like the hard work I've put in to making communities, particularly in New Haven, more accepting of people with disabilities in all levels is really shown by my new role at the city. And so I think my overarching advice to everybody is find your passion and ignore what everybody tells you about what you can't do, and try to figure out ways to reach that goal. Whether it's, I'm 27 years into my career, and, really the past 6 months in this new job really is the crowning jewel on that. It's a job I might have been able to do just as well 25 years ago. But we finally, as a disability community, have gotten to a point where we're being considered for those jobs that aren't necessarily solely about the disability community. And so, so that's great. But I think the goal for everybody needs to be pick your goal and work to it. And, you know, my goal was always to do things that people didn't expect. And if that was going to law school, that was not expected. And then practicing law and opening my own practice, that was not expected. And then taking on the job at the city, that probably wasn't expected. And I can definitely say my current job was not expected by most people. And ironically, my mother's like, I don't think you should take this job. It's much more work. It's, you know, it's going to be hard. Are you sure? You know, and I was like, I'm going to do this. So even my mother is still sometimes just like trying to lower expectations. But
Just be a mom.
yeah, just be a mom.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think, so for me, it's always been about challenging what people expect from me. And that's really been easy because, you know, every time I go up the ladder one more rung, people don't expect me to go up one more rung, and then I'm able to do that. And so, and that's always fun for me to beat the expectations. So that's what's motivated me. Might not motivate everybody, but it's been critical for me to do the unexpected. So.
Well, Michelle, in climbing the ladder in New Haven, I can tell you all that Michelle is an extremely well-respected individual in New Haven. Like she has done the work to put herself in the place where she is. And, you know, I wouldn't be surprised to see if you go even farther than that, if you want to, or if your mom doesn't talk you out of it. You know, I'm actually doing the job she was doing prior to moving up, and she's just there and knows everybody, knows the process. And every time I talk to somebody, you know, it's like, you have big shoes to fill. And I'm like, I know, you know, so that's great. But thank you so much for talking with us.
I'd be happy to answer any questions people have.
People have questions for either Michelle or Cheryl. Is Cheryl still on? Yeah, Cheryl's still on. Nobody? Anybody?
Well,
are we all tired?
We have posted all of the PowerPoint and the document that Michelle referred to. All of that is on our website. So please feel free to visit there, and you'll find it under the Building a Great Life drop-down menu with all of the resources for today. This has been a fabulous panel. I know, you know, Michelle, it was really a great ending, I think, to the discussion that Cheryl started, because Cheryl talked about expectations and you really embody that whole concept. So it was just wonderful. Please remember that next month we'll be talking about employment opportunities in Connecticut. So we'll be getting down to a lot of the things that happen in Connecticut, and that will be July 1st. So
Molly, did you put up the link for the evaluation?
It's going to be sent out right after this. It goes right out.
Okay.
So we don't have to worry about putting it in the chat box. You will all get it in your email. Please fill out the evaluation and send it back. We really do read those, and we pay attention to them. So thank you all. Have a wonderful night. Thank you so much again to Cheryl and Michelle and to Gretchen.
Thank you both.
Thank you so much.
Good night, everybody.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thank you very much.
Hi,
That
Cheryl.
was great.
Really inspiring.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Boa noite. Good night.
Good night. Are you stuck?
Well, the chat box keeps coming up on me.
Oh,
Melissa Cruz is on. Now she's not. No, she is.
she's still on. She's on. All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Let me see. Maybe leave.
Okay, I am going to shut everyone out. Thanks, Mark. Have a good night, EA Martinez.